Hello, everybody. Are you ready to dive deep into your minds? Because I'm about to ask you a question. Let's get started. Do you ever think about your teenage years? Did you ever do something, let's say, bad as a kid? Are you thinking about the time you stole? Shh, don't tell me. Let me ask you this. Have you thought about juvenile delinquents? What about IQ? You must have considered impulsivity. Whoa, you just read my mind. That's exactly what we're here to talk to you about today.
In this presentation, we will cover 4 large areas of our prospective study. First, we will introduce our variables. We chose impulsivity and IQ scores as our independent variables, and number of crimes committed as our dependent variables. Secondly, we will discuss the rationale behind this research project and why it is vital to study. Thirdly, my team and I will introduce our hypothesis, and lastly, we will propose our theoretical model.
So as adults, sometimes it's really hard for us to consider that being a teenager is hard, and hard in ways that we don't necessarily experience as adults. When a teenager says or does things, sometimes adults will be quick to judge them, not really based on the content or context of what they're saying, but more so on their age and perceived level of maturity. On the flip side, when an adolescent commits a crime, especially a long pattern of crimes, adults tend to want punitive action, and this is reflected a lot in our justice system. However, as a group, we wanted to explore the idea that perhaps youth delinquency isn't an inherent problem within a person, but rather a situation that can be buffered by looking at several variables. So our group wanted to address the societal issue of delinquency rates among adolescents and really investigate which variables influence these rates so that we can inform preventative action. So, when looking into the literature, we settled on 2 points that really stuck out to us. The first point was that those in previous studies demonstrate that adolescents who commit crimes are more likely to also commit more crimes in adulthood if they are not receiving intervention. Furthermore, we also realized that impulsivity and levels of deviancy are correlated. And this really led us to focus on 3 variables, which is IQ, impulsivity, and crime rates. So, adolescents with lower IQ are at a higher risk for developing behavioral problems, and as young as ages 3 to 4, they can predict delinquency in adolescence and young adulthood. Furthermore, spending time with other delinquent youth can have a greater impact on those with lower IQ throughout their childhood. Moreover, impulsivity leads to more lower-level crimes that are less planned, and it's really about the idea of cognitive control. So, those with high IQ, but who are delinquents, tend to commit less crimes, especially less petty crimes. And this reduced impulsivity allows them to not be arrested for as many crimes. Lastly, crime rates kind of encapsulates both IQ and impulsivity. So those with low IQ also tend to commit more petty crimes like petty theft, destruction of property, battery, truancy, etc. And these crimes are more likely to lead to shorter sentences and subsequent reoffending in cases of higher impulsivity, which kind of creates just this big cycle.
Now, based on our rationale, you may already know where this is headed, because I tell you, you are one smart group. So, we hypothesize that IQ, as measured by the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for children, moderates the relation between impulsivity and crime rates in adolescents between the ages of 12 to 16. With the low IQ, a higher score on the impulsive behavior scale for adolescents predicts higher crime rates. With the high IQ, on the other hand, impulsivity would predict lower crime rates.
For this study, we predicted that the relation between an individual's impulsivity level and the number of crimes they've committed depends on their IQ. For example, someone might score very high on an impulsivity measure, but since they have a high IQ, they don't commit as many crimes compared to those who have a low IQ. The intelligence quotient in this case is the moderating variable. Thus, we chose moderation as our theoretical model. Put in lay terms, a moderation variable influences the relationship between an independent variable and a dependent variable. In other words, moderating variables are able to depict a statistical interaction. This aligns well with the chief purpose of our study, which is to test the effect of IQ on impulsivity and crime rates. In other words, we want to see under what conditions someone is more or less likely to commit a higher number of crimes. This figure illustrates our hypothesized moderation association of IQ on crime rates. Line A represents a direct effect of impulsivity on crime rates. Line B, which is what we're interested in, represents a moderation effect of IQ on the relationship between impulsivity and crime rates.
So thanks for listening to our presentation and taking the time to watch this video. We hope this gives you more information and opens the door to something that you might not have thought about before.